And I suppose I should hit record there. All right. So we'll start with Cassie's video. If you would think that clicking all these screen share buttons would be automatic by now, right? Like, hello. Here we go.
Hi, so the piece I have is Rosin Eating Zombies. And the background of this piece is the students have just received it today. They are going to sight read it in class. And to set them up to help hopefully be successful, we're going to do a couple of discussions about shifting as well as have a few warm ups that are dedicated to shifting. So, for our warm up, we're going to do tunneling while shifting or shifting while tunneling and one finger scales. So, hopefully, this sets them up for the day so they can be successful. And then, after we warm up, we're going to look. I'm going to have the students look over the piece for a couple of minutes to see if they can identify any areas where they feel like shifting is necessary, and I'm going to see if the cellos and basses can also identify the areas where they need to shift and the markings in the music that indicate that cellos need to do extensions. And then an even bigger background for this piece is, or this class actually, is the students have been introduced to shifting. However, they it wasn't in any of their musical selections yet, so this will be the first time they can actually apply it, and it's not something they're reading out of their method book. So once we do that, I am going to open it up to the students and say, okay, where do you think we should shift, and why do you think so? And then once the students answer the questions and we have like some discussion in the class about it, if majority of the class says, oh yeah, I agree with that, then we're going to move on. Or before they move on, I'm going to have them marking in their parts just so it makes sight reading a little bit easier for them. And then if they don't agree, we're gonna bring it up and say, okay, why do you think this, and why do you think we shouldn't shift here, or vice versa. And hopefully this opens up a discussion as to when shifting is absolutely necessary for them and when it's just like too inconveniencing for them. So after we do this, we are going to be sight reading it. So our main focus for today, just to get them all settled and like caught up a little in their like minds and stuff and their playing technique, is we're going to focus on measures 1 through 28. So we are going to sight read those, and I want to personally break it down into sections for them just to make it a little bit more manageable, just in case they get a little overwhelmed with the new music they're introduced. And then hopefully all goes well. If not, we'll run the sections a couple of times and then we will combine those sections together after that. So we'll play measures 1 through 28 um as a whole. And hopefully this sets them up for like the later half of the music, which we're going to do the next day. And so they'll feel a little bit more comfortable, like hopefully their questions were answered about the playing techniques needed for this piece. So one thing I also noticed here is just paying attention to the cello extensions, because sometimes you don't know if they're gonna overdo it, like they're gonna like bend their finger backwards in some like odd and weird position, and just making sure the cellos are like comfortably extending their finger back to get the flatter notes. And when they're doing this and when we're like running through the whole measures 1 through 28, I will be having a checklist in my mind saying, okay, are they maintaining their left hand shape? Is it still a C or is it collapsed? And are they sliding their left hand smoothly and lightly on the string, or are they kind of jerking it and making it heavier to move? And their pitch accuracy, because that is a big one when it comes to shifting. A lot of students will say they're shifting, but it will be either like 20 cents flat, 20 cents sharp, like you never know. So that would be like my checklist to make sure the students know what they're doing and like and what they learned in the lesson that day. And this should all take around 30 minutes total, with the 20 minutes spent discussing it, or maybe 20 minutes spent discussing it, and then 15 minutes or 10 minutes playing it and assessing them. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Yay, Cassie. All right. Yay. Yes, Dee Dee, thank you. Yes, we should clap for her because hopefully she'll watch the recording, right? So see, watch the recording of your own recording. Oh boy. Okay. But at least you'll see our claps for her. Any questions for Cassie, either both here in the recording and that I can send her? Anything that came to mind from her plan as a question? Not so much. That's all right. I thought she did a nice job and she answered my question I had sent her ahead of time. Please talk a little bit about assessment, right? So she mentioned her checklist and the ways that she could check for some of those things there. So that was great. All right, so moving into our live folks here today. And like I said a few minutes ago, if you can keep it on the shorter, more concise side, and I will also keep our questions on the shorter side today to make sure we can get through everybody. So Dee Dee would be up first alphabetically. Does that sound all right, Dee Dee?
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, when you're ready, jump on in.
Okay, so for my lesson, I kind of approached it as like the first day that they've been handed out the piece, and the standards are number 2.1 in the first category 2. So it says students perform by ear musical or melodic tonal patterns in major and minor tonalities. And then the rhythmic area, it's kind of weird how these are defined. Oh, I see. Contact area 2A. Sorry, I didn't see that earlier, so I'll change that before I submit. Then the area 2B, I would also do 2.1, which is students will perform rhythm patterns containing subdivisions. So to start, I'm kind of assuming this is probably 8th grade, and this is probably just from like my own background knowledge, 6-8 is a little bit tough at first for 8th grade students, and especially for string players, because there's 3 notes like per bow sometimes, and you just get some like really weird like uneven bowings. So I would have them clap the rhythms that are found in the piece first. So I would write their common rhythms up on the board. So like a group of 3/8 notes, and then a quarter note and an eighth note, and then dotted quarter note. And I just have them clap those in some different like rhythmic progressions so that they can start feeling the 2 big beats, because that's when their bows are going to change usually, is on the 2 big beats. And then I noticed looking at the score that in measures, let's see, measures 1 and at the end when the D major section comes back, measure 123, everybody has the same melody between that section. So I could write, well, I would initially like play the melody and then have students try and echo it back in like 1 measure segments. And then that way everybody could piece together like the main idea, because it's going to come back when it switches to G major and A major. And even though it's not the same notes, it's going to be the same finger patterns when it's in G major for the cellos, and it's going to be the same finger patterns for violin when it's in A major as it was in D major. So I just figured that having them all learn the melody together first would make it more interesting for the cellos and basses, because otherwise, if you just try and start at the beginning, you're going to spend a lot of time focusing on violins and violas, while the cellos and basses are literally just playing open strings. So they're going to be really bored at first unless they learn that melody with the upper strings. And then one other thing that I might not focus on the very first day, but that I would keep in mind, is that there's a lot of double stops in the cellos, and when it's open strings, it's fine. But then there's a lot of double stops where it's like first finger on 2 strings, and those are really deceptively hard to get in tune because they never feel like they're really exactly perfectly across, and especially on school instruments, like they might not be the best. So it's really difficult to tune those. So I'd keep that in mind for a later class, but probably wouldn't work too much on it today. And by the end of class, like I would just have everybody play the melody together. And for an assessment, I could say, you know, if you're wearing green today, play the melody and then count them off and then they would play. And so I just pick different groups of students at random. That way nobody has to play by themselves, but there's a smaller group, so it would be easier for me to hear. And that's it.
Yay, Dee! Awesome. Awesome. And thank you for already including what you might do for assessment there. And I also love that you included a different way of setting the groups of people. I love using all those different methods of, okay, if you have one sibling, you're in this group. And if you have more than one, you're in this group. If your birthday is January to June, you're in this group and wearing green. And so that's fantastic. Much more creative than what I've done all semester, which is just alphabetically, right? And that gets very boring. So that's awesome. Good, good. Questions for Dee Dee? Yeah, Katie, thank you.
I was just curious because I didn't really notice the thing you said about the cello double stops. What I know you didn't really include it in your lesson plan, but like, what kind of things would you do to help them get that in tune?
I would just have, I mean, depending on the level of the students, like maybe I'd have somebody else in the class play a note. I mean, with the A and the E double stop, like you could have everyone else play their open A string and then help the cellos tune to that. And like what's really tough about it is that it goes pretty fast and that just comes out of nowhere, that you just have to like put one down. And so I just have them do it a lot of times, like slowly, like tune and then see where you need to angle it. Because the thing is, sometimes it just doesn't feel straight across. And so one of your notes will be really, really out of tune. So, I mean, depending on how in tune the rest of the orchestra is, I would maybe have like, you know, a small group of violins play an E and then somebody else plays open A and help them tune to that. If I had a really in tune piano, maybe I would use that to give them some like some steady pitches. But then after working on it like really, really slow and really tuning it, then I would put it back in context and just at a really, really slow tempo and have them practice landing on those double stops.
Awesome. Great question from Katie and good ideas from Dee Dee. Good, good. All right. If you have any other questions for Dee Dee, feel free to stick them in the chat. And yes, Katie, the well-tuned piano is a big if and also a very important factor. Good. Good. If you have any other questions for Dee Dee, feel free to send them to her in the chat. And if you feel comfortable, leave them open so we can all see them, but obviously up to you. And let's go ahead and keep moving. Next would be Lucas alphabetically. Lucas, you up for that? Yay, and we get to see you too. Wonderful. Whenever you're ready, take it away.
Yeah. So I got it right here. So my I guess first things first is the wait. Can you guys hear me? That's first things first. Okay. So the background information for me, I was thinking this is gonna be like the second or third time, probably the third time that they're seeing the piece. So first time was a sight reading kind of run through of it with a little bit of work. And then the second time is kind of the first half of the piece. So I'm going to focus on my third lesson on the latter half of the piece. And so just the should I can't remember if people addressed the goals that they had.
At least
Do you want me to
briefly.
address the goals, Dr. Fulcher, that I was going
Yeah.
to? Yeah.
At least
So
briefly, let us know. Yeah.
Yeah. So the ASTA curriculum learning task that I was addressing was 2B, which is the rhythmic aural skills, and 2E, which is ensemble skills. And I made a brief statement of how students will demonstrate comprehension of the bowing of correct rhythms, bowing the rhythms correctly. So like in measures, I have it right here, 50 through 58. I was going to touch that. And that is going to be with the violins and violas. They are on beats 1 and 2. Like beat one is a down and then another down, and then Two is an up bow and another up bow, which is different than what they might expect. Because normally, like if I were to see that myself without the markings, I would assume just alternating immediately. So I would want to readdress that and make sure they're doing that correctly, because I mean, some of them might be, and then some of them might not be, and then you'll be able to see it very obviously. And then let's see, my next part was the way that I was gonna check of the development of ensemble skills is just by listening to their blending and their balance. Um, and then I would also ask questions like if I think the blending and balance is not quite there of what I want to hear, I would maybe ask violins, hey, who has the melody at yada yada, and then they'd have to be like, wait, do I have the melody, or like who is it? Um, so that would be one way that I would kind of do that throughout my rehearsal, just to ensure that everybody is listening, trying to listen across the ensemble. Not like maybe they'll identify that cellos have the melody, but they'll not realize that the double bass also has the melody with the cellos. Like uh, sometimes I remember when I was young, lower pitches were sometimes harder to pick out, and so definitely trying to get them focused on that. And then just my rehearsal outline, because those were just kind of how I have it laid out. Is uh, how I was how I have it laid out, and what I just went over is just how I'm addressing the goals. Rehearsal outline. I would start at measure, like I said, measure 50 to 58, working on the bowing of rhythms. The same thing. Do I need to go this in detail, Dr. Fulcher? I just want to make sure I'm not taking up too much time.
You're good. You're
Okay.
good.
Same thing at measures 83 through 99. The violins have a bowing rhythm that is marked. And then after that, those are kind of the main things that I saw in the latter half of the piece for bowing rhythms that would be that would need special attention. Then I would just continue through the latter half of the piece all the way to the end. I would be focusing on the cello double stops, like Dee Dee mentioned, trying to get those in tuned a little bit, give them uh, the tools to work on that and practice that at home. So I wouldn't spend too much time on it, but I would try to give them the tools, like Dee Dee said, just kind of adjusting it and kind of listening. Maybe have a tuner, if they have a tuner on their phones or something that they can use at home, and just they can help them do that. Let me see. I gotta find my spot again. Bowing double stops. They also measures 131 to the end. There are bowing double stops. I believe that's for. I didn't mark it specific in my lesson plan. I didn't. What I have written down here, I didn't mark it specifically, but I believe that that's violas and violins.
And cellos.
And cellos, yeah,
Yep.
yeah. I was having to double check, but I just remembered that it was a lot of them that had that, and so again, I'd go over it the same way that I would with the cellos. And then I would just touch up the upper mordents with the violins, and that's measures 115 to the end. I would just touch those up, revisited them again. I would be talking about them in my first lesson and the lesson after that. So as this being the third lesson, so they'd have heard it twice now. Hopefully that they're starting to kind of get it, but I would definitely touch that up again just to make sure they're getting it in case this is the first time that they've seen that possibly. And then I would just run the piece from 83 to the end as the ending of this lesson plan. I was planning on that it's quite a bit that I put in here, and I was planning on this being about a 15-minute lesson. I like to overplan my lessons. I know that look that you're giving me, Dr. Fulcher. I just like to overplan my lessons so that I can like cut things out, move things to my future lessons, because I hate underplanning a lesson. It's the worst. So that's basically my lesson. That's it.
All right, Lucas. Woo woo. Good. And I'm so grateful that you knew exactly what I was going to say, right? Because I was going to ask, did I miss, how long this lesson's supposed to be? I think what you just planned there, Lucas, might be a 90-minute lesson, like for real, like, or maybe 50, I mean, depending on how everything goes, but like
Yeah.
that is serious over planning. And let me say, it's a good lesson. Like what you have planned out there is really, really good. But if it's only the third time that they're seeing the piece, and
Yeah. I
you've
imagine that it would take a lot
yeah,
more
they're
time
gonna
to hit everything there.
they're
But
gonna need a lot of help with everything
mhm.
that you've mentioned, or depending on the group, of course. But it's very likely that they're gonna need
Yeah.
help with a lot in that second half of the piece. Not least of which being the key change, right? The fact that it goes to A major there in the second half of the
Yeah.
piece. So just over planning is great. I'm with you that under planning and getting to that last 10 minutes of the class and being like, I have nothing to do is the worst, right? Like over planning is good, but only over planning to an extent. And you and I've had that conversation before,
Mhm.
where you also don't want to be at a point where the bell rings and you're in a horrible stopping point in your lesson because you hadn't planned for a good amount of time, and it leaves everything feeling unfinished and all that kind of stuff. So keep thinking through what an appropriate amount of over planning is. But again, I think the things that you had planned, the things that you picked out of the piece that were important, the fact that you were so focused on the bowing, all of that I think was really good. Nicely done. So let me be quiet for a second. Questions from anybody else? Yeah, Dee Dee, go for it.
I thought that you had a really good lesson, like from the teacher's perspective, but what would you do if the students are starting to lose focus because there's just like so many things that they have to like I think at a certain point sometimes they could get checked out. Like what would you do?
Um it depends, I guess, on why they're getting checked out. I don't want my lesson to be so like I said, focusing on the cellos and their double stops. Uh I would never want to be focusing on them so long that students are just sitting in their seats doing nothing. Likely, what I would do is if we got to the double stops at 1:15, that only the cellos have, might rehearse that just a little bit. And then if I think, okay, this is going to be something that I on the fly, I could restructure it so that I go to the next spot that has double stops, that has a lot of the strings playing the double stops, and I could just hit that all at once. Um, that was something that I was considering, and I would definitely, if it was starting to take a little bit longer, which it definitely could, as this is the third lesson. Um, I would then just change my plan slightly, go to a section that has a lot of the double stops, and get all of the students used to it at once. And that way, there's a lot more engagement across the ensemble. And I tried not to stick. Uh, Basically, it's just keep them engaged with playing and listening to each other, because usually students, if they're playing, then they're engaged. It's hard to be disengaged while you're playing. Uh, So I would just be worried that I'd be focusing on one group too long, and that would lead to the disengagement that you're talking about. Does that answer your question, Dee Dee?
Yeah, I was just thinking like, you have a really in-depth lesson where you consider a lot of different factors. And like for us as a teacher, like we're like, that's great. Like I want them to know everything about this section. But like sometimes for students, especially younger students, like they might not have the attention span to add in every single
Mm-hmm.
element that we're thinking right now, because like their brains haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah.
Awesome. Great question from Dee Dee. Great response from Lucas. Good, good. Any other questions for Lucas? Send them in the chat. Nicely done. And moving on to Dominique, if she's up for it.
Yeah, let me pull up my lesson plan. Okay, so I planned this for max about 30 minutes. And the background information on this is it's about ready for a dress rehearsal concert time. They're about performance ready. So the standards I put for this are 2F 2.3, which is the students will demonstrate an understanding of appropriate balance and of the melody and accompanying lines. And then 2A 2.2, students manipulate single pitches to adjust intonation and listen for ringing tones. I also put that students will be able to appropriately self-evaluate their musicianship and that they will be able to complete a full run of their music without stopping at a high level. So um, I have for the activities that will start with a warm-up with scales in quarter notes in G, D, and A major, and then in triplet repeating rhythm. So each note is played 3 times, and then we'll tune. Um, and so how that'll happen is that the first violin, whoever that may be, will tune their A string, and then once it's in tune, the rest of the orchestra will tune. Um, and then we'll get to the piece itself. I like to have some imagery for the students, and so I'd provide that for them, come up with some sort of like background information for the piece. I know there's not too many program notes for the piece, so I'd try to find something for myself to give to them, um, and then tell them about that, and then do a full dry run without stopping, and let them know that we're not going to stop. Um, and then afterwards, let them know that that's kind of how it's going to go during the concert. Um, and then we're going to begin working backwards on the piece. I have some things that I'll go through if a couple of things didn't go as well. Like if they're having trouble with matching bowings or staying in time. But I'd like to also ask them their opinion on how the run went. And depending on what they say, I'd like to address their concerns as well, because I feel that their opinion is important. Um, Once we're at the beginning, from working backwards, we'll do another full run and I'll ask their opinion again and tell them to go home and practice those things. Um, so that's where they kind of informally evaluate themselves. Um, but as for the assessment, I just watch for consistency since this is, near the dress rehearsal. Um, so each time they play, um, watch for what's discussed in previous classes, like posture and bow hold, your left hand shape. And then if there's not consistency, just address it by speaking about it and demonstrating. Um, and then, what else do I have here? Um, since it's near dress rehearsal, ask yourself, do the students quickly make the small adjustments that are needed? And that's all that I have.
Yay, Dominique! Yes, nicely done. Good, good. That's great that you included some assessment. And I love, of course, that you included some self-assessment and the students talking with you about, we're so close to the concert. How do we feel about how this piece is going? And it's not only how the piece is sounding to the audience, but how do the students feel playing it? And do they feel confident and ready? Or are there some more things you can address to help them with that? So I think that's a really great and important discussion to have with them. And then also turning that into some practice goals for them is great. So that was really nice sequence there. Questions from other folks? Crickets. Yeah, crickets this morning. Right. Oh, of course, I should have written it down. There was one other thing I was going to circle back to. Well, phooey, it just left my head. I wrote down also that I liked, oh yes, Dee Dee, go for it. Thank you. Save me.
I'll say, I don't know if this is what you're gonna say, but I liked how you mentioned that you had several ideas of if they struggled with blank, I would do blank. And then you don't have to use all of them, but it's so good that you're like prepared in that sense. And then also like with the understanding that like you're not going to be able to fix everything right before a concert, so you have to like prioritize and ask the students like what they think needed the most work, and just, you know, make sure that everybody's feeling confident before the concert, because that's the most important thing at that point. I don't know if that's what you were thinking, but
It was very close, actually. It was that. Plus, I appreciated you saying that it wasn't just that you were going to talk about the things that maybe needed to be more consistent, but also demonstrating them, depending on what the item was. That we're not just going to say, you need to be more consistent with where your piano is through the piece, but also demonstrating for them how loud that piano should be, hopefully having them actually implement that, because many of us, myself included, are guilty of that when we get close to dress rehearsals. We just talk about this needs to be different, this needs to be different, this needs to be different, but that goes in one ear and out the other for some of us perhaps, and definitely for middle school students. So having them actually have to stop and implement that is really important, and I feel like that's what you were saying you would do. So excellent. Yay, Dominique. Good. And because I think we have time for me to just show this picture real fast. You were saying you couldn't find much on program notes for the piece. This is Murphy. So this is Susan Day, who wrote the piece, and this is her dog Murphy. And so Murphy's Jig was written in honor of her puppy dog, which is perhaps why you can't find a whole lot out there about it. It's about a puppy dog, or dedicated to puppy dog. All right, moving on to Katie if she's ready.
So I actually had a lot of similar ideas to Dee Dee. I also approached this as an 8th grade class, and it's the first day they've received the piece. Let's see. My primary objective in this lesson is to use warm-ups effectively to prepare them to sight read the piece. So I want to start with warming up with D, G, and A major scales, and I would have them play them on triplets, either one set of triplets per note or two, so that you can start with a downbeat on each scale degree. And you would repeat the top note for balance, and then assuming that I had gotten better with my cello skills or whatever, I would model / play along. So then I would move on to reviewing 6/8 time, or introducing it depending on whether we talked about it before. It seems like it can be pretty tough with string players when you think about bowing, at least. So I actually I want to split the room into 2 groups. At first I was thinking about having like this side of the room clap the macro beats, the other side of the room clap triplets, but I decided that I would rather split it into like if your birthday is in January to June. And then you said exactly that like 15 minutes ago. I was like, I promise I came up with this by myself. But I think that splitting it up that way so that they're not all on one side of the room or the other forces them to listen to what they're doing and to what others are doing at the same time. I would also have them clap the 1/4/8 triplet, like da 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 da. I would have them clap that one as well, and then I would have them switch. So if you just clap the macro beats, now you're clapping the rhythm, or the subdivision. And that's area 2B 1.2. I didn't type out what all of those mean, but so I'm just going to move on. I would switch back to instruments after that and have them repeat the same exercise but on their instruments with bows. And for that, you can just use like on one note. Like maybe you pick a note in a D major chord or whatever. There's lots of ways you could do that. And I would also introduce or review the down, down, up, up bowing. That's hooked bowing, right? Okay, I just wanted to make sure I had my terms right, because like sometimes I think I know what I'm talking about, but I just want to clarify. So we would introduce or review that. and I would change it to a quarter eighth, quarter eighth. So da 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 da. So they can really get that into their heads. And that's areas 2B 1.4 and 2C 1.1. I would have them play a few melodies. I would play them and have them repeat after me. So echo. And so what I'm sort of doing in this lesson is a sort of a sound before sight kind of thing, because I'm not writing anything on the board. I'm not showing them anything that's notated. I'm just having them repeat after me and sort of do it by listening, but also making really sure that the rhythms are very precise. So I would do a few melodies in each key, and you want to be sure that one of the melodies in each key is the main melody of the piece. Da, 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 da. So, because you want all 4 sections to be able to hear and play the melody, because everybody has it at some point. And it should be very much under tempo, especially because they're just listening and repeating, but also because it's sort of tricky and they're going to need some time to work it up. So probably like maybe 80, I don't know, da 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 da. So that's areas 2A 1.1 and 2.1. And then, assuming that all goes well, I would have them sight read the piece. Obviously, again, under tempo. I would like to try to make it all the way through without stopping, and so I would communicate that to them, and I would advise them, like, if you get lost or if you fall behind, try to at least get the macro beats, like get the first beat of each triplet set if you have to, but try to get all the notes if you can. So I figured that encompasses areas 2D 1.2, 1.4, and 2.1, and 2E 1.1 and 1.2. And so if I had time, I wanted this lesson to be like roughly 25 to 30 minutes, because I would probably want to leave myself time for announcements, housekeeping, and review of other repertoire. So if I had time, I would consider playing a recording of the piece for them, probably the one on J.W. Pepper, because nothing on YouTube sounds good, because this is pretty hard. And I would have them listen to it, look at their music, and make some initial markings, and read through the piece again. I might also save that for the next day. It all depends. But for the most part, I want them to have a very clear-cut understanding of the meter and the rhythms that they have, and hear the melody. And I don't want them to worry too much about the super technical stuff, because we have time to get there. It's the first day. So.
Yay, Katie! Yay! Good. A little bit of overlapping comments from Lucas earlier and from Mario back on Monday, just thinking about, how much time you've got and how much is really feasible to get through, plus how we're utilizing sight reading. And all of us are going to decide, to do that in different ways. But this is a fairly long piece and has some pretty significant sections to it, right? If nothing else, the different keys, right, are pretty clear different sections to it. And so trying to have them run the entire piece the first day may or may not go well. And I think you recognized that, it may or may not be successful. And I like that you gave them guidance for how to succeed. If you're not going to get every note, which they're not, try to get beat 1 of each measure, try to get those macro beats, that kind of thing is great. Because that's just good life training as a musician too. But really thinking about, is that a worthwhile experience for them? And in some ways it probably is. Do the pros outweigh the challenges of trying to put them through that experience? Or is there a chance it's going to give them a bad taste for the piece because it's so challenging that first day and you don't want to leave them there? But you had a very clear sequence. I really like, kind of front loading with, as we talked about this Monday too, with warm up, even though that really does just feed right into, rehearsal. It's not a separate thing. It is part of what we're doing, and is worthwhile to spend that much time on that. So I think that was good. Again, I need to be quiet. Questions from other folks?
Oh, real quick, I was going to mention assessment, because I actually had an idea, but I probably wouldn't do this the first day, like with this lesson plan, but I was thinking that it could be fun to put them in quintets actually, and have them play like 8 measures or something. And I was actually thinking about that because we talked about it in choral methods, and it can be a fun way to assess how well everyone knows their part. It's because you can listen more individually. So that's kind of what I was thinking about. But
That's awesome. Yes, yes. And so much more viable in choral and strings than it is in band. Because in band, you have to have, I mean, yeah, there are too many parts to be able to just boil it down to a small chamber ensemble like that. But you can do that in choir and orchestra. Good. Questions from anybody else? Nope. Alrighty. Well, again, feel free to stick them in the chat. Oh, Dee Dee, actually, I think I am just going to have you, if you're willing, stick it in the chat. And let me go ahead and jump to Audrey. I want to make sure she's got time to tell us about her plan. But thank you, Dee Dee, for having a question. So, Audrey, when you're ready, take it away.
All right, cool. So my lesson plan, a little bit of background on this is the students have been working on the piece for about 2 weeks. They're preparing for their final concert of the year, so it's probably around March or so. And basically, they've already sight read the piece. They've done a little bit of studying on the background of the piece, and they've had a little bit of time to practice the fast eighth notes, even though it isn't completely up to speed yet. Also, this rehearsal chunk should take about 25 minutes to complete. Some of the objectives, I had 2.1 students perform melodic tone patterns, and 2.2 students manipulate single pitches to adjust intonation. And then they will also become more confident in working through the running eighths and learn how their different parts line up to complement each other in certain sections, because there's a lot of moving parts in that piece. And also the students have already done their warm-ups in the class. I was thinking that they would do their warm-ups, work on a different piece first, and this would be the last thing that they'd be working on. Because I usually try to save, or if I was teaching, I'd try to save the funnest piece for last to kind of end the class on a high note. Yeah, and then one of the main things I'd like to work on would be the tempo, because I think the tempo is really big in the piece. And just getting that to all line up. So before I begin playing, I'd have the students sing their parts while air bowing on their instruments. Since this section is slurred, they need to be comfortable by doing up and down bows in two. So I would encourage them to also keep silently air bowing as I work with each section, but kind of, yeah, lining everything up and making sure that they get that slur pattern down nice and good. And then the section that I chose, what is the section? Oh, this is measures 123 through 131, by the way. So this section has a lot of different patterns going on. We have the melody, which are all the eighth notes, and then also the 1, a 2, a 1, a 2, those rhythms as well. So I would basically choose each section to go individually. I'd probably start on the 1, a 2, a rhythms. So the second violins, cellos, and basses first. I'd have them play that section just with them and have the melody air bow at the same time. With those people, I would talk about not holding the quarter notes for too long, so they don't lose the tempo, because I think it's really easy to start dragging in that section. And yeah, we would work on that. And then after that, I would run the first violins and the violas, so kind of switch parts. And while those first instruments tend to slow down, these instruments are going to tend to speed up as they go through the eighth notes. So just working on making sure that they're keeping their tempo nice and steady, and the other people are not slowing down and dragging, and kind of getting that to line up. So after that, we would go to measure 107 and do basically the same thing. I'd have all the pizzicato parts go first, which is everyone except violin 1 and violin 2. And just make sure that those are right on the beat, to kind of create a nice metronome for the melody on that part. And then I would obviously switch and have the first violins do the first part, and then the second violins do the second part because they switch off the melody. Once again, just making sure that the tempos line up. And then I would, or to finish it off, I would have the whole orchestra run the section from 107 until the end of the piece. And that would kind of be my assessment to see how much they were able to pick up and how much they're able to line up the tempo and make everything sound good, because it's a lot of things going on just in that little section. So I'd definitely be really nitpicky with that. But yeah, that would basically be like a rundown of my piece for that.
Yay, Audrey! Nicely done. Nicely done. You picked, I think, the hardest section of the piece. Every time I've done this piece, that ending, it is designed to be the finale of the piece, right? But it's like every melody comes back and overlaps and also trades off. Which part has, I mean, the melody moves from part to part, from 123 to the end, all over the place. And oh boy, is it a challenge to get it all to come together and stay together every time I've done it, which is maybe saying something about the way that I've taught it, or not taught it, but every time I've done it, I feel like there's this just frantic holding on to the end, right? Like we hit 123 and it's like, let's all just hold on for dear life until we get to the end. So anyway, nice sequence, Audrey. I have one or two little string things I want to point out, but let me open it up to anybody else first. Any other questions for Audrey before I mention a few string specific things that might be good to think about here? Cool. So, oh, go for it, Katie.
So I didn't actually have a question directly for Audrey, but one of the things she said reminded me of something I forgot to mention. When you were talking about like teaching them not to play the quarter notes too long, I was thinking about having them subdivide everything in the main melody and take out the ties and the slurs. So you're playing da 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 da. Would that be helpful?
Yes, most definitely. Obviously, you can't stay that way forever because they have to eventually get the feel of those slurs and hooked bowings and all that kind of stuff. But for purposes of solidifying that pulse, yeah, have all of those quarter notes turn into 2/8. And you might, depending on the group, of course, have to actually notate that for them. Some of them will be able to process that and see a quarter and turn it into 2/8 easily, and others will struggle with that. So you might actually have to notate it out for them. But I think that's a really valuable activity. Yeah. Yeah, good thought. Good thought. And that's exactly the section I was going to come back to. So Audrey was talking about, oh, whoops. 123. Audrey was talking about making sure this quarter note doesn't drag. We actually will tend to rush that quarter note. We'll tend to rush that to get to this next note as our bow is just already moving. We're going to chop that D short. And then you mentioned worrying about these eighth notes rushing. It's actually much more common for them to drag because you're trying to fit so many notes in a bow, and there are string crossings and everything else that's happening. And that's a very bow specific thing, right? That's why we struggle with those things, is because it's related to the bow and what's happening there. And so I completely understand why you thought the tendencies that you did, but I wanted to take a second and point that out. We will actually tend to kind of rush this as we move into that second note, and we will tend to drag passages like this because our right and left hands are struggling to stay coordinated through there. But again, no fault on you. What you said made perfect sense for a non-string player. So good teaching.
Yeah, I think I just mixed them up.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. So it was a great teaching moment. Thanks for giving me a chance to say that. Let me give the whole crew today just 3 compliments, and then I know I need to let you go. Really great lesson plans today, folks. One more round of applause for everybody. Nicely done there. Good. I love that we had a variety of backgrounds today. We had folks who started on day 1, and then we had folks who were almost at dress rehearsal, right? And thinking through that entire sequence of what rehearsing a piece requires. And I really appreciate that we saw a nice variety of that today and your sequences and processes through that. I love that you're thinking about classroom engagement and how that correlates to the lesson plan as well. We had a couple questions and little conversations about making sure you're keeping students engaged as you have to focus on one section or another at a time. So I love that your teacher brains are already thinking about that full class engagement piece. And I also love that I think Katie was our first mention of listening to the piece. You know, she talked about we might listen to the piece. There are some teachers and conductors who get really nervous about listening to a recording, especially early in the process, because they want students to develop their own aesthetic experience of the piece or whatever the case might be. That's fine. But when you're talking about middle school students, they don't have enough perspective or context for that yet, most of them. They need to listen. They need to hear, oh, that's what that melody is supposed to sound like, because they can't look at the black dots on the page and automatically get that the way that we do. So I highly, highly encourage listening to the piece early in your rehearsal process, even on day one, listening to that music and having that be something you really consider doing with your students. They can still develop their own aesthetic experience and you will help them do that. But most of them are just not quite there yet. So the listening is a really important piece. So excellent work. I think this is on Canvas, but I'll double check before next week. Please read chapter 10 in the book. It's the one all about recruitment, and we're going to talk about that next week. You don't have any assignment to complete related to it, but we're going to talk about it in class. So it will be really helpful if you've read chapter 10. And if you have questions about anything else going on, feel free to stick around. Otherwise, I need to let you go. Thanks, folks. Great work today. See ya.